With a standards-based mindset where grades equal the mastery of the standard, how are we supposed to deal with behaviors that have typically impacted the grade that we put on a report card? Let's visit Mrs. Stick's classroom, where during a lesson, she calls on a normally wonderful, engaged student named Jimmy. Jimmy lashes out at her and says, "Stop picking on me, you evil person!" And she's surprised and disheartened. She calls him out into the hallway as any good teacher would and says, "Hey there, what's going on? This is totally not like you." And he says, "Oh man, last night my parents were fighting and I didn't get any sleep and I'm just really frustrated. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have lashed out at you like that." She lets him know, as we all would, your behavior was out of line, but I totally understand that you're frustrated. How about just like a quiet, chill day in like a solo place in the classroom? And he's like, "Hey, I'm really sorry again. It won't happen again. Thanks for understanding." And everybody goes about their day. No need for zeros in the gradebook, because great teachers like Mrs. Stick have lots of tools and empathy to deal with student behavior. Proximity, private conversation, reflection sheets, buddy rooms, cool-off stations, running errands can all happen before we need to do office referrals and call parents about every single situation. But I'm sure you're asking, what are we supposed to do about those student behaviors that legitimately stand in the way of our ability to assess mastery? We also want to be careful that we don't just want compliant robots turning things in. We want them to do their best on meaningful work to really demonstrate mastery of our content. Let's check back in with Mrs. Stick, who's struggling because Sally is just consistently not getting her work turned in on time. Does she not understand the directions, or maybe the content? Perhaps she's having issues at home, or maybe she's just being stubborn and doesn't want to do it. Mrs. Stick needs to investigate if Sally can't or won't do the work, and also whether or not this is a chronic situation. When students have gaps that keep them from being able to understand what they're supposed to do or how to actually demonstrate mastery, we call them a can't. And when students just don't want to do the work behaviorally, we'll call them a won't. A lot of times students who seem like a won't are actually a can't, because it's better to look like you don't want to than that you're stupid, and we've got to rule out what those obstacles are. Most kids fall into the can't category at least some point in their academic career and just need a little bit of extra instruction or support. But for kids that are chronically in this scenario, they're probably going to need more targeted supports and interventions. Kids who won't do their work can be super frustrating for teachers. And in this case, we need to figure out how to make learning mandatory for these students because they are capable. This often can involve loss of privileges, like recess or after school, and in some cases, can even lean on a school-wide system for support. Kids who just regularly don't want to do their work usually need behavioral interventions like plans, conferences, and frequent meetings with counselors. But most importantly, both of these types of kids need to be built up by the superheroes that we are as teachers. So as great teachers, we know our first step with can't students is to identify what their gaps are and then build a plan for, or better yet, with the student. We can look at things like seating, repeating directions, chunking our assignments, building background, reteaching, and RTI. And Mrs. Stick decides that Sally has a little bit of a gap with multiplication and she needs some more practice, so she's going to pull her during RTI to work on that skill. When a student won't do something, we got to figure out the root cause because, sometimes won'ts are actually can'ts. Once we figure out what the situation is, we've got to build a plan for, or better yet, with that student too, which can involve some of those same interventions, but definitely is going to require a lot more patience. In social studies, Sally is having a real problem getting her work turned in, and so when her work is missing, she's not going to get recess and a parent phone call home is going to be made. And finally, the most important thing that we can do as teachers is build strong relationships with kids, because when they know that we care about them, they're willing to put in the hard work to fill their learning gaps. And they're also willing to do the work to demonstrate mastery because they care about our class because we care about them.